so strong. So this program we were doing with Len, you need some encouragement. You need strength to do what he's doing. I mean, he's a victim of social services. Sorry, not social services. Sorry, care sort of problems with institutions. That's what I'm trying to say. We're talking about Thames Valley Police complaints of professional standards, fraud, Law Society bar standards, General Medical Council, nursing, and midwifery council, parliamentary and health service ombudsman, the Office of Judicial complaints, the ombudsman for them, the Information Commissioner, and Avon and Somerset Police, and not forgetting Somerset NHS Foundation Trust. Len, so it's the institution. I call them institutions. They probably are anyway. Yeah, it's them people who are supposed to protect us that we're talking about tonight.
Yes, indeed. Now, I've been first encountering this since 2004. As I previously said, at a conference on brain injury in Owen Mitchell's in London, a consultant psychologist actually said 70% of people with brain injury, acquired brain injury, are divorced by their spouse. And I was poisoned, according to doctors, by toxic air on aircraft as a pilot. Other aircrew and passengers can suffer exactly what I have, and they continue to do that to this very day. And what you're actually seeing on there, I've had so many allegations of mental illness made against me more recently, particularly by Somerset NHS Foundation Trust mental health nurses, and to a slightly lesser degree, Avon and Somerset Police. But these mental health nurses completely trashed me. I was severely mentally ill. I was a narcissist. You name it, I've had it thrown at me. But here's the man, Professor Gordon Turnbull, one of the world leading authorities on complex and post-traumatic stress disorder. Professor Turnbull trained in the RAF. He was a neurologist and a psychiatrist, so he was dual qualified. And as you see, Wing Commander, consultant psychiatrist, Professor Turnbull is very clear. Leonard Lawrence is not suffering from mood disorder. It's caused from an incident involving post-traumatic stress disorder in 1984. In fact, that's now been taken back to 1975. Now, who is more suited to make that diagnosis? A mental health nurse who had seen me for maybe, around about 2 hours, others who had never even seen me, or Wing Commander Professor Turnbull, who's known me for a very long time. What was interesting with Somerset NHS Trust is how mental health nurses are weaponized, and particularly those involved with the police, to attack you, to discredit you, and throw as much mud as they can in that process of discrediting you. But in fact, what's actually unfolded, they've actually discredited their self and their profession. The psychiatrist at Avon Somerset NHS Foundation Trust, the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Daniel Merrion, who's a consultant psychiatrist, he wasn't buying into these allegations, nor was a consultant psychiatrist, Dr. Upperday, who was being set up to have me sectioned. And as Dr. Upperday said, Mr. Lawrence is so mentally ill, why hasn't he seen a doctor in the last year? So we're going back now, Andy, to where it all actually began in 2000.
Before you start there, Len, it is absolutely disgraceful against your job description to judge people, when they, number one, when they don't even know you. But let's turn the tide a little bit. Let's say, for argument's sake, you was ill. That's not the sort of treatment an ill person would need, in a police custody suite. So anyway,
some of these allegations these mental health nurses have made against me are so serious they can't be discussed. The National Crime Agency, surprisingly, were extremely good, and they were monitoring the whole attack on me while it was unfolding. Former policemen, some of who are quite serious, were also involved in my safeguarding. And when these mental health nurses entered the Premier League, the security services were also notified, and again they were extremely good. But what they did, these nurses, put me at still am a considerable risk. But they never expected to get caught, Andy, and they have been caught, and it shows an incredible insight into this trust, into this NHS trust. The chief medical officer has left, the psychiatrist who was going to section me, he's left, and so have others. But we'll come back to that. But going back to where this all began and the problems I've encountered with professional bodies. So we've got an hour, we can go through them quite swiftly and come back to them. But what I've learned over the certainly last 10 years, there is so many other people who have encountered the same problems with the same people, particularly surrounding the Court of Protection, the Judicial Ombudsman, the police, the complaint system. So let's start it all off in a summary. I started to have problems with my memory after a fume event on an aircraft, and I wasn't well, but it got progressively worse. Just after 2000, my wife was aware of this problem, and she set about divorcing me. And when it all started to unfold, my wife had me arrested on very serious charges of, what were they? Indecent assault, sexual harassment, theft. And the whole process was to get me evicted from the house by the police. And she delayed my arrest until there was a court hearing where I served notice to get custody of my children. And on the day of the arrest, the court hearing, I'm arrested by Thames Valley Police. And they weren't very nice, and I couldn't get to court. Fortunately, the judge was suspicious. He didn't evict me from the family home, and he adjourned the hearing for 1 week. Then Thames Valley Police found out that I was due in court in that day. I was going to a court hearing. And as the copper said, we see it all the time, Mr. Lawrence. We're used as pawns in divorces and to get the male, predominantly the male, evicted from the house. And that's where it all triggered. And that is what re-triggered my PTSD. Thames Valley Police weren't nice to me in that police custody cell in the beginnings, but they were nowhere in the league that even the Somerset were. Anyway, I got released, and my wife was actually ordered to leave the house, which is unusual. And then I was still not well, and I couldn't work out what was happening. And eventually I went to a doctor, a psychiatrist, to try and work out. He didn't even bother looking at the evidence which would have identified to him I'd been poisoned by aircraft fumes. I got the DVD sent back to me unopened. Anyway, so to silence me, my wife's solicitor and barrister, the solicitor was Solicitor Graham Stephen Fraser, who worked for a law firm called BP Collins Solicitors in Gerrards Cross. The barrister, Dominic Brazil, 1 King's Bench Walk, who's now moved to another chambers. They get me certified. under Part 7 of the Mental Health Act without a medical by private psychiatrist Dr. Jeremy Royce and Signet Healthcare, Godden Green, when an NHS psychiatrist said my cognition was grossly intact. And on that letter, which we've now recovered, I get certified under the Mental Health Act and all my rights are taken away from me. And I'm placed under the official solicitor of the High Court. In fact, in particular, the now deputy official solicitor, Helen Mary Cliff. And there was nothing I could do. Every time I tried to get released with a court hearing, wasn't happening. And that's I'm delusional by that certificate, according to a mental health nurse from Somerset NHS Foundation Trust. That's delusional. That is the certificate Wing Commander Professor Gordon Turnbull had issued to release me. But the government legal services never disclosed that to the court. They hid it. Now, that particular Court of Protection medical certificate is with Avon and Somerset Police, with a woman police constable, Alana Snow, based at Bridgewater. And the professional standards recently came back to me and said woman police constable Alana Snow only has a very vague knowledge of the Court of Protection's issue. And that's nonsense, because Alana Snow had that certificate in her possession for about the 8 hours I was at the Bridgewater Police Custody Centre on the 30th of March 2022. But now they're denying it. Fortunately, we've recovered one of the CCTV footage, which shows I'm being interviewed by Alana Snow, and there was 4 others in that room. And they had that Court of Protection certificate in that room. Anyway, we go back to the beginning, Andy. I've been certified. What I didn't know, my wife, solicitor barrister Dominic Brazil, 1 King's Bench Walk, had a close relationship with solicitor Helen Mary Cliff in the office of the official solicitor. Before she joined there, she had briefed Brazil in her family law cases, and we can now evidence that. Anyway, so I'm trapped. So I lost my home, I lost a lot of my savings, and many other. They absolutely asset stripped me, and the official solicitor Helen Mary Cliff enjoyed every minute of it. Anyway, eventually I got rescued from the official solicitor of the High Court it started with Dr. Sally Evans, the Civil Aviation Authority Chief Medical Officer. It involved the British Airline Pilots Association, and importantly, I got referred to Wing Commander Professor Turnbull, RAF. And what happened then? Turnbull took over my care. Helen Mary Cliff, the deputy official solicitor now, she wasn't at all happy, nor was anyone else, because I had a good psychiatrist who was going to work and help me. And he said, Mr. Lawrence, I've got to go against 5 other psychiatrists, but just trust me, bear with me. And from September 2005 to February 2006, I spent a lot of time with Professor Turnbull, and he released me with that Court of Protection certificate. I took it to the official public guardian office. They'd never heard of me, Andy, never heard of me. And then I took it to the office of the official solicitor. But before I handed it in, I photocopied it. And would you believe it? Handed it to a guy called Stephen Piper. And then it went to Helen Cliff. And they never disclosed it to the Court of Protection. They were still holding me. And Professor Turnbull had rung me up a couple of weeks later and said, "How are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm still being held, sir." He said, "What? I'd released you earlier." So he wrote out another certificate Then I eventually got released. And what happened, I'd been evicted out of the house by bailiffs while subject to the Court of Protection and put on the streets. Absolutely. And Buckinghamshire Social Services, what was his name, Richard Lasson, he knew full well those certificates hadn't been registered, and they allowed it to happen. And Thames Valley Police, there was one particularly nasty piece of work called Detective Inspector, later Detective Superintendent, Gillian Wotton, Wootton, based at Aylesbury. She had known that my wife's solicitors were in possession of all my stolen financial records, but she didn't do anything because my wife had sworn an affidavit, I don't work and have no income. So if they pursued it, it would put my wife and her legal team, particularly Solicitor Graham, Stephen Fraser and B.P. Collins, in some considerable difficulty. So she covered it all up. And as she went up the hierarchy to Detective Superintendent, she was able to shut down all investigations beneath her. And that's what she was doing. So Thames Valley Police, that's where it started. Going through their complaint system, an absolute waste of time. All you do is get thrown around the long grass. There'd been a report written about me by Detective Inspector Watts. He sussed it all out. He summarised it. He knew exactly what had been done to me. Yet Thames Valley Police, professional standards. I think the head of professional standards at the time was Detective Superintendent Timothy DeMeyer, now the Chief Constable of Surrey. Special procedures were put into place to stop any investigation into my case. And what they didn't expect was me to ever get hold of their files. Now, we had some good coppers in Thames Valley who were leaking me information, telling me where to look, how my house was sold, how they got the caution off the land registry. Really good cops. 2 cops actually came right the way down to Devon from Oxford when I lived on Dartmoor, told me not to trust my solicitors, Simpson Miller. They weren't working in my best interest. And they said, go straight to a judge. So that was an early insight into Thames Valley, where my problems could have been solved straight away, but they were absolutely, not all the coppers, but the hierarchy under Sarah Thornton, under Chief Constable, what's his name, Francis Habgood. Absolute waste of space. But the evil two were then Chief Constable John Campbell. When Campbell was a Deputy Chief Constable under Chief Constable Francis Habgood, around about 2018, a Magistrates Inspector at Constabulary, Tom Windsor, his staff went in there and they found that in just 1 year, 35,000 crimes hadn't been recorded. Now you listen to these crimes, they were rapes, indecent assaults, sexual harassment, cases against vulnerable adults and vulnerable children. All these cases, cases not recorded. And what happened? Habgood left, Chief Constable, then he gets appointed the part-time chair of Buckinghamshire Safeguarding Board. He can't even safeguard the public in the police, let alone in a safeguarding board. Then a really nasty piece of work, Deputy Chief Constable Campbell gets elevated to Chief Constable. And then Jason Hogg, that's Deputy Chief Constable, gets appointed to Deputy Chief Constable. Jason Hogg, Thames Valley Police. And it's under their 2 commands that I got attacked by Avon and Somerset Police viciously. And the sole intention was to get me sectioned under the Mental Health Act. And Avon and Somerset were only too willing to oblige. So were the Somerset NHS Foundation Trust. So that's a good insight into Thames Valley and But like I say, there's been some good cops in there at various ranks, but unfortunately it's suppressed by their more senior officers. But their complaint system does not work, and it's designed not to work and not to help people.
It's supposed to serve, protect, and respect, of course.
They do not serve, they do not protect, and they don't command any respect. I've recovered a number of documents, and when you see what they've written about me and how they treated me, there were some good coppers in there, actually, detectives, and they were on my side. And but they get removed, they get shut down by more senior officers. But in the case of the professional standards, a report had been prepared by Chief Superintendent about Chief Superintendent Claire Arms, Head of Operational Support, Avon and Somerset Police. Now, Arms has got a history with Judge Simon Oliver, the Court of Appeal, the Court of Protection, and myself, and where she's covered these things up. And what had happened just before my arrest on the 30th of March 2022, just prior to that arrest, Chief Superintendent Arms was under investigation, and she had a finding made against her for the obstruction of justice in my case, and it involves His Honour Worshipful Brother, His Honour Judge Simon Oliver. And what happened? The case gets sent to the Office of Police Conduct in the Southwest, headed by David Ford. What happens? It gets sent back for a local resolution. And the local resolution was the detective superintendent's removed from professional standards in charge of it. The detective inspector is taken off the case, and it's substituted with a detective inspector Brickwood, who has a close association with Claire Arms in another case where a man with brain hemorrhage was left on a police custody cell for 3 hours, almost 3 hours, and it was covered up. Anyway, the officers involved with me were removed from their investigation. Only 2 people could have removed that detective superintendent from her position. That was the Deputy Chief Constable, Nikki Watson, who herself left whilst under investigation, went to become a fire commissioner, or the Chief Constable, Sarah Crew. So it was one of those 2 who stopped this. Now, that's Arms, yes. When she was at Cornwall Police, that it follows a hearing with Simon Oliver, where he conducted a Court of Protection hearing when he was not authorised. And so a Court of Protection patients are very, very vulnerable. Children, adults, or the elderly are disabled. And Oliver was conducting my Court of Protection case when he wasn't authorised, and he knew he wasn't authorised. Then he sent instructions to the Court of Appeal to make sure my case failed. But just to ensure that my case failed, I came under my solicitor, Simpson Miller, destroyed a lot of my legal most of my legal files. I came under attack by the Department of Works and Pension and left for almost 6 months without money to buy food. And through that's the instructions Simon Oliver sent to Master Bancroft Rimmer in the Court of Appeal. And the photograph in the left-hand side is the worshipful brother Simon Oliver in his Freemasonry regalia. And he attacked me horribly, viciously. But interesting, I also was a Freemason. So this thing about Freemasonry and brotherly love, no. If you're at the bottom of the hierarchy like I am, you're just treated like trash by people like this. And we'll go into this in a lot more detail, but Freemasonry had a real significant input when they tried to get me sectioned on the 30th of March 2022. Right, so we're going back. We've dealt with Thames Valley, how they've and they're still not trustworthy. There's, like I say, a few good coppers, but the problem is at the very top, particularly with Jason Hogg. Now, the complaint system. So you try professional standards, and predominantly you get handed to civilian caseworkers. They haven't got a clue, and they just throw you in the long grass, round and round and round. The officers, i.e. the detectives within professional standards, they do not want to get pulled into this. So they always stand on the periphery and leave you dealing with these civilian workers. And both Avon and Somerset and Thames Valley, and particularly Avon and Somerset now, that's all they've done, push me into the long grass. So basically, once you finish with the police, you go to the Independent Office of Police Conduct. They are anything other than the Independent Office of Police Conduct. They've got a appalling track record. Stephen Hayes, who wrote a book, or wrote several books, 3 of them, who I know, The Biggest Gang in Britain. Stephen Hayes was a police officer with Greater Manchester Police. Quite a colourful character. He spent a little time in Special Branch, but the books are well worth reading, and he's highly critical of the Independent Office of Police Conduct. Look at their involvement in Hillsborough. Look at the case of Stephen Kisku, a man disabled who was accused of raping a girl, which he never did, and he was convicted, I believe, on the semen sample, but it later transpired that Stephen Kisku was sterile. He couldn't have done the case, and that evidence was withheld. So the IOPC, again, the ones I've dealt with in the Southwest, all of them have been civilians. They couldn't even investigate themselves, Andy. And the evidence that was sent to them, that finding Chief Superintendent Claire Arms guilty for the obstruction of justice in my case, the IOPC Southwest chose not to disclose that information to me. They hid it, as had Avon and Somerset professional standards. So the other, so predominantly I've had problems with Thames Valley, Avon and Somerset. Devon and Cornwall Police, that's been a mixed affair. Some of the people were very good, others not so good. City of London Police, it was an absolute waste of time going to them. You're just wasting your time. When you look at the scenario with action fraud, I think it's less than 1% of cases ever get investigated. And there was a good publication on that by, was it Morgan Bentley from the Times, when it was the front page, how action fraud are not investigating these cases. In my case, though, it was quite interesting. A detective superintendent in the Met, no, detective chief superintendent in the Met directed me to action fraud, where my case, I mean, what you're looking at now is a list which gets published by Hilton Freeman every so often, and it gives an insight into some of these what these police officers get up. If you look at the second one down, Inspector what? Gloucester Police, assault on wife, a conditional discharge. The next one, Wilson, West Mercia Police, sex with victims of crime, jailed for only 14 months. And as it goes on, look at them, they're horrific.
Do you notice, I was reading this, and this is my opinion on this, most of them, unless they're really done really bad, some of them are jailed for 18 years, but that's very minor. Most of them are not jailed more than 3 years, they're less than 3 years, or they're actually given discharges.
Yeah, I know. Quite often, if it involves senior officers, they're very rarely prosecuted, and they will just retire or be transferred to a different police force. It's the lower ranks where probably inspector. What's it? I think a CS. I think that could be chief superintendent. Budden, Gwent Police, gross misconduct. He got sacked. That was in 22. So, like I say, they're not all angels. Some of them are fine, but not all. But within Avon and Somerset, I'd never seen anything like it, how they attack me. And the comments when you read them all. So that's the officer police conduct and the you're wasting your time. They will send you around the houses. One interesting thing, a manager there in the Southwest, Cerise Webster. And rather than focusing on Chief Superintendent Claire Arms with the finding obstruction of justice, she decided it's all going to be around Assistant Chief Constable John Riley, who's now the Deputy Chief Constable. So she'd done a whole spiel all about him because it wasn't going to lead anywhere. Where had she done Claire Arms, it would have led somewhere. So that is the IOPC. You're wasting your time with this organisation. In fact, some of their employees have held senior positions. They've actually come out and said the IOPC not fit for purpose, and they won't investigate senior officers. So where does someone like me go who had suffered brain injury? I was a pet to party, only a judge in the High Court family or Chancery Division or the Master of the Court of Protection or his nominated officers, about 100, could have dealt with my affair. Well, the problem unfolded because our government lawyers and no other solicitor, barrister or judge disclosed these to the Court of Protection. So there you are, very vulnerable, but the people who should be safeguarding you don't disclose them and you're left in limbo. So you're a good cash cow. They can absolutely strip you. And as I said earlier, Susan Andrews, BP Collins Solicitors, tried to charge me £4,000 to write 2 letters. And the judge wasn't having that, Judge McCulloch. Then Brazil, a Court of Protection hearing, where the judge thought game weren't authorised to hear these hearings. It lasted 10 minutes. At the end of that 10 minutes, I didn't get a £10,000 cost order present in that. There she is. Yeah, £2,000. She's now left that practice. She's gone to another one. £2,000 a letter for 2 letters. And her department had all my stolen documents. And now I know they had the medical report that had certified me under Part 7 of the Mental Health Act. Yet the firm wrote and denied the existence of it. How many people would have uncovered all this? Very few. So when you start to look back in their history, one only wonders how many other people there are like me. So we looked at the police, and where do you go next, Andy? Like I say, action fraud. In my case, a chief super in the Met, I forget his name now, but I have got it, directed me to action fraud. And my case got picked up by a man by the name of Andrew Profit, who had served in the economic crime unit at the Met. And I'd done a short statement to action fraud on tape. Then Profit asked for a much more detailed statement. I then got recorded and I did a much more detailed statement where offences of fraud, of perjury, and other more serious allegations, offences were identified. Now that was done by Stephen Profit. Instructions were given to Thames, Devon and Cornwall Police to come out and see me. which they did. And it was the head of the organised and serious crime unit. Him and one other came out. There was a case to answer. They contacted Thames Valley Police and they were told to shut it down, not to investigate. And the man who told them to shut it down was Detective Inspector Gavin Tyrrell, the head of the Economic Crime Unit. Tyrrell left and went to join the City of London Police, where he rose rapidly to Detective Superintendent in charge of economic crime. Now, I had a very low opinion of Tyrrell, but I couldn't understand why he allowed two officers, detective and a financial officer, to come all the way to Oxford, down to Devon to see me. And they told me not to trust my solicitors, Simpson Miller. We now know that Gavin Tyrrell was being bullied and directed by no less his Detective Superintendent Gillian Watton, where it all starts. So you see how these people go up the scale. How they go up the scale. Yeah, that was the man who came out, Neil Blackhurst, right? And we now know that it was Gillian Veronica Watton, Thames Valley Police, who was shutting this down. So the blame comes right back at her. That's Arms. Again, all these are Thames Valley.
I had her here somewhere.
Gillian Watton. Yeah, you just had to go down one. See here, stop, go up. Sorry, just go. Yeah, just go up fractionally. You can just go. Okay, there she is. Right. That was she was. Force Intelligence and Specialist Operations Department includes serious and economic crime. Here's Watton. So she knew my wife had stolen my gear, my records. She knew about the Court of Protection certificates, but she covered it all up in the beginning. And it's solely because of her it escalated. Had she dealt with that in the very beginning, it would have all been cleared up there and then, and no one else would have become involved. But she didn't. She covered it up. She was based initially in Amersham, and then of course she went through the ranks, got up to the rank of Detective Superintendent, and she could shut down people like Gavin Tyrrell. But that's a tremendous insight. Then of course Thames Valley got themselves into so much trouble, more senior officers get pulled in, and that's why Thames Valley Chief Constable Jason Hogg is so keen to get me silenced. But you got to remember, not only me, a lot of us, women, particularly women, we're all finding our cases in the Thames Valley area with the designated family judge, the worshipful brother, His Honour Judge Simon Oliver, once again. And what was happening then? Oliver was conducting he did my case when he knew I was a Court of Protection patient and he wasn't authorised. He did that in 2012. But on one case he announced, and the Chief Constable Sarah Crew has the transcript, Oliver announced it had been appointed the president of the Queen's Bench Division, now the King's Bench Division, by Lord Justice Singer. Oliver's never been the president of the Queen's Bench Division or the King's Bench. Sir Brian Leveson was the president. Anyway, that has been addressed. There he is, the worshipful brother, Simon Oliver, in his judicial robes. And there's a lot of mothers, and this again why Thames Valley want me silenced. And surprisingly, even in Somerset, we're all too keen to do this. There's this large number of children who's been taken from their mothers. Those that haven't, mothers have fled the country to abroad, taking their children. Sometimes they weren't able to take all their children to live in countries, outside of the UK having lost their homes. Christopher Brooker addressed this in an article, and others have, but Brooker was shut down by by a High Court family judge, the same High Court family judge who tried to stop the Metropolitan Police from investigating a child abuse case. That was overturned by the Court of Appeal more recently by Lord Justice Jackson and 2 others. Now, I had a lot of time. Oliver knows full well that I was a Freemason. He is a Freemason, a worshipful brother of the Berkshire Masters Lodge, and he had no hesitation, and he was entirely satisfied that as a former member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces Royal Navy, whilst lacking capacity and identified as extremely vulnerable, I get put on the streets, evicted from my home and put on the streets. He was entirely satisfied by that. A lot of Freemasons are not. And I'd been in Freemasonry, Andy, in a lodge in London. Membership had been drawn from the Lord Chancellor's Department, from the judiciary, circuit judges, but importantly from detectives, from the Detective Training School at Hendon, from the Metropolitan Police Obscene Publication Squad, the paedophile unit. My employment brought me into close contact with officers from the Diplomatic and Royal Protection Squad and from special branch officers, some of whom were Freemasons. They intervened. When following that hearing with Oliver, I came under attack from DWP, Inland Revenue, the Met Police, and I'd been left with no money to live, and these Freemasons intervened, and in fact they've intervened recently. Should I require anything, I'm to ask, but that can't be said for the Grand Lodge, and they do not want this coming out. They do not want the publicity, but the reality is my priority, like many of my colleagues, are these mothers and these young children who are not being protected by police forces. So anyway, we've had a talk about the police, and when you start to unravel all this, you go to professional bodies. And I think the first one I went to was the Bar Standards Board under Dr. Vanessa Davis and the then head of investigations, Sarah Down. She's married and her name's changed. I can't recall the surname. They appointed a retired judge to help me, Mr. Rice. Mr. Rice came to my house in Devon. He said, "This is unbelievable." He said, "It's disgraceful." And because Mr. Rice was a retired judge, was being too helpful for me, the Bar Standards Board withdrew his services from me, leaving me on my own. And I complained predominantly about Barrister Dominic Brazil, Barrister Nicholas Allen, now the head of 29 Bedford Road Chambers, and the Barrister Caroline Wilborn, One Garden Court Chambers. And there was a barrister, and he was actually a good one, Simon Cowden, and he'd actually been to court and said my house had been sold without authorization. And Oliver denies that ever occurred. I've got the written notes of that to evidence that. And anyway, there was an investigation, and the Bar Standards Board Complaint Committee dismissed my complaint and cleared the barristers. However, about 6 of the barristers excused themselves and did not want to get involved. One of them was a lady called Sue Carr, QC. Sue Carr, I think a year ago, was appointed the new Lady Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales. Yes, she recused herself. And now we know that Nicholas Allen, who I was complaining about, actually sat on the Bar Standards Board Complaint Committee, the very committee that was investigating him. And so I was never going to win. And they covered it all up. I've located the name of everybody who was on that committee. And recently, about a year ago, having been told 10, 12 years ago, our standards board complaint committee, our standards board had destroyed all their case files. That was found to be untrue. They hadn't destroyed the files, and I did an SRA, and I've now recovered all those files electronically and in hard copies. And surprise, surprise, barrister, what was her name, Caroline Wilborn, who had told the had sought legal advice from the Bar Standards Board what to do, because she had submitted an allegation that the submission that I'd recovered capacity from my house was sold, so the court protection certificate was not necessary. Caroline Wilborn was holding that court of protection certificate when after my house was sold. So it's a real den of iniquity, and you're just thrown in the long grass. There she is. Like I say, I've now got the files they do not want me to see, and they've been submitted by the Bar Standards Board. Then, Andy, the Law Society, God bless them. I went to them, and I got run around the houses by their caseworkers. Then eventually, the Solicitors Regulatory Authority appointed a external solicitor to investigate, and she absolutely crucified the barristers and the solicitors, who had done this. Sarah Benfield, the solicitor, Ratcliffe Hughes and Gamma, the law firm BP Collins Solicitors, Graham Fraser, absolutely crucified them. And she said the case needs to go to the Court of Appeal and be reheard. And surprise, surprise, this solicitor, investigating solicitor, gets removed from the case by the one who seemed to be in charge was a woman called Diversity Director Lanani, and the manager, a woman called Suki Gill, who's now left the Law Society, Solicitors Regulatory Authority, and gone to the Royal College of Surveyors. She blocked all communications with me. So how these bodies are reacting. Then I went to the General Medical Council, and it got to the top. Anthony Omo, who's the director, I think, of investigations of the General Medical Council. And I've been certified by Dr. Jeremy Royce without a medical under Part 7 of the Mental Health Act, taking away all my rights without a medical, when an NHS consultant psychiatrist, Dr. Amma Malofi, had written, my cognition was grossly intact. So by a private psychiatrist, everything was taken away, and Anthony Omo covered it all up. Don't you see a pattern happening here? Then what else we got now? We've done them, we've done the law, we've done the Bar Standards Board. Then we go down to the judicial complaint system, the Office of Judicial Complaints. And we had Dow Simon, Sherman, Greenland, Judy Akron, and as the head of these. And you go there and you complain about a judge. And once again, you get these civilian caseworkers who run you again and again and again into the long grass, trying to shut you down. And that's what they did to me, that whole department. And when Judy Akron left the Office of Judicial Complaint on the last day, she posted to me my court of protection medical certificates. which she had sat on. Now, after the Office of Judicial Complaints, Andy, you go to an organisation called the Judicial Ombudsman. Now, my case was investigated by then, a guy called Nick Rose, who reports to a guy called John Critchfield, a manager. They prepared a report, and Admiral Sir John Bridgestock did a summary, and it got sent to the then Lord Chief Justice and then Secretary of State for Justice. And surprise, surprise, no action was taken. That is the Court of Protection certificate issued by Dr. Jeremy Rice from Signet Healthcare, Godden Green, without a medical, and sent to the office of the official solicitor in London. Look at it, no court seal, nothing, just a piece of A4 paperwork with these details put on it. Now, what was interesting, the Public Guardian never knew of this. The Court of Protection never knew of this. No one, because there's no audit trail. They're just pieces of paper being passed from solicitor to doctor and back to solicitor, holding you and not disclosed. So that is not a Court of Protection certificate. It's just a piece of A4 paper. And Lord Hardy had said around about 2014, tens of thousands of people are being certified under the Mental Health Act, and the safeguarding are not being followed. So anyway, the report was prepared for the Lord Chief Justice and the Secretary of State for Justice, and it all sort of quietened down. Now, I asked for a copy of that report, and apparently it was destroyed. But somehow someone leaked it to me. You know, this is Lord Hardy. Look at it. It is serious. We're very concerned about what we heard. Evidence suggests tens of thousands of people are being deprived of their liberty without the protection of the law and without the protection of Parliament. And in some cases, the safeguarding are being willfully used to oppress. And that's what was happening to me and many others. And that's how we're losing our homes, our assets. And one has to wonder how many people are being held in mental health institutes for years and years and years. I think there was a lady recently, she's been held for 40 years. But that's what those mental health nurses were trying to do, and that's what even in Somerset were trying to do on the 30th of March, was to get me sedated, arrested, detained under the Mental Health Act, and sedated. So I'm not delusional about this. It exists. So anyway, with the Office of Judicial Complaints, the Office of the Judicial Ombudsman, it later went to Paul Kernighan, who had been a former Chief Constable of Hampshire. Not a nice man, and basically told me to go away. But then I got hold of that report, and what had happened in the report prepared by the Nick Rose, John Critchfield under Sir Admiral Bridgestock, they never told the Lord Chief Justice or the Secretary of State for Justice that I'd suffered brain injury and I was subject to the Court of Protection. They kept that out of the report. When the Secretary of State for Justice found out he and the Lord Chief Justice had been misled, it went to Martin John, who was then the Public Guardian and later the Deputy Director of Adult Social Service Care at the Cabinet Office. And not long after, a Court of Protection certificate, a legal aid certificate was issued. My case posed a substantial question to be answered by the Civil Court of Appeal. But Simon Oliver intervened and decided he could deal with the case. And that's where it all starts to unfold. He wasn't a Court of Protection judge. He wasn't authorised. And his involvement was to send instructions to the Court of Appeal, to a junior judge there, a Master Bancroft River, to ensure that my case failed. Never expecting, there he is, never expecting and that came from James Beattie, the Court of Protection. Oliver does not hold. So we now got to ask, Andy, how many Court of Protections cases has my worshipful brother Simon Oliver conducted in the Thames Valley area and other areas when he was not authorised to conduct these hearings? And that is
maybe Len, just to interrupt a little bit, maybe there's other barristers and judges that are doing exactly what Simon Oliver done.
Oh yeah, there is. I'll give you some of them.
If it wasn't for him, the police wouldn't be on your back.
No,
mental health wouldn't be on your back. And so on and so on.
Freemasonry was heavily involved with that. The officer who oversaw my arrest was the worshipful master of a police lodge, where membership of police was from. He's actually written me apologies, so that's the only reason he's not being named. And the solicitor selected for me was not the duty solicitor, was not the headway brain injury solicitor, even the Somerset Police told. He just happened to be a provincial grand officer from Somerset Freemasonry. So it's too coincidental. But Freemasons who had many years services in the police service, including in counter-terrorism special branch, have intervened to help me. And like I say, should I need anything, I'm just to ask. But I've been told to pursue this and continue with it until this safeguarding is addressed. But yes, there was many other judges in Thames Valley who were doing these cases. District Judge Robin Chowdhury, who's now a circuit judge in Milton Keynes, he said he sees hundreds of cases where Court of Protection patients' signatures are got on legal aid and to avoid the Court of Protection. Now that is a very significant thing on that video, Part 7 of the Mental Health Act. Now you may wish to tell Mr. Allen that his files, which he won't let me see, have been recovered from me. His emails, which he had sent to Brazil and other, saying he simply accepted all that Brazil wanted of him. He doesn't know the consequences. Those emails have been disclosed to me and recovered. Yeah, he's been caught. So any order of what's been made would be void. Now, Sir Geoffrey Cox, when he was the Attorney General for England and Wales, I had a private meeting with him. Can't name those that took me there, but Cox was brilliant. Mr. Cox is holding a number of Court of Protection certificates, but more importantly, Sir Geoffrey Cox, when Attorney General, wrote to the Crown Prosecution Services and they gave me the means to set aside all judgments in my case without the requirement of the Court of Protection. So Cox, so was Lucy Fraser, who was the Solicitor General. I got an email from her, head of office. Should I require Lucy's help, I was to ask. Another Attorney General, Dominic Greaves, was absolutely brilliant. He wrote to Thames Valley about my stolen documents and a thing. He just got ignored. So there are some good people out there. And so was Jack Straw, surprisingly. He was very good to me. It was because of him I actually got the legal aid certificate. But other people won't get that. But in Thames Valley, there was Robin Chowdhury, who conducted a hearing. There was District Judge Jones, and she said, oh, do we really need to bother about Part 7? Yes, she did. Jones, District Judge Faultgang, District Judge Devlin. We've got all and others. We've got all these judges conducting these hearings when they're not authorised. In the High Court, Master Basil Yoxall, he refused to pass my Court of Protection certificates to the Court of Protection. They just laughed at me, smirked at me. And again, Fulford, Mr. Justice Adrian Fulford, later Lord Justice, he upheld Yoxall's decision not to disclose my Court of Protection certificates to the Court of Protection. So the general public don't stand a chance. But one thing more recently, the way I broke this and uncovered it all was the Information Commissioner's Office. And surprisingly, I got help. I got a lot of help. When I did a subject access request with Avon and Somerset NHS Trust, I got a few documents, not many. Then I got a little bit more. Then the only way I could proceed was go to the Information Commissioner's office. Fortunately, someone very senior in that office, I won't name him, but very senior, intervened, accelerated it. And at the same time, the Caldicot Guardian from Somerset NHS Trust intervened. Then I got a full disclosure. Do you know, Andy, over 120 people associated with Somerset NHS Trust mental health services and the trust entered my medical records, and they've put everything in there to discredit me. Notably, I assaulted my wife and children. The evidence what would clear me from that was with Thames Valley Police, and Chief Constable Jason Hogg won't give it to me. Fortunately, the Crown Prosecution London stepped in and given me a letter. They've got no evidence, no record of any allegations against me assaulting my wife and children. The Court of Appeal in London stepped in to say Mr. Lawrence Bancroft Rimmer does not and never has been authorised to sit as a Court of Protection judge. So there are some good people out there. Unfortunately, the problem is right at the very top. Anyway, look, we've reached our hour. We can always come back and talk more about this, but I think I've opened a hornet's nest now, haven't I?
Absolutely. Yeah, just it's not just you. I'm gobsmacked. You know, like on today's TV, there's care home abuse.
Yeah, care home child abuse.
There's children. You know, with Maggie Tuttle. There's
I mean,
some of these people you've mentioned, like Simon Oliver. I'm pretty certain he's working or was working recently with family people.
Yeah,
you know,
there's a lot of. He's been involved with a lot of family cases, and they'd known about his history, and it's been covered up. And again, Freemason, if I had done anything which was wrong, I would have been thrown out of Freemasonry. But they've protected him and they've covered it up. And there's a lot of Freemasons who don't like this. So it's not all Freemasons. There's a lot. But, you know, when I come back and look at all the people I know, like Maggie Tuttle, when she dealt with all these children, a guy, Mike Clark, who's had to flee the country with his mum. You remember him, don't you? Mike Clark.
He's in Thailand, yeah.
Yeah, he's had to flee. And that was all about the Court of Protection. Then you had Yvonne Goder and the problems she's had with her mum, where they held her for a long time. We had the Carol Woods. We had
Susan Kellner Johnson.
Yeah. Then we had a man, we call him Peter, from up near Yorkshire. And he was protecting his mother. And he was very devoted. He was an amazing man. When I came under attack, he invited me to go and live with his mum and him in Europe. You know who I'm talking about. I don't think I can name the country.
Yeah.
And that man has got, to silence him, he got deported back to this country in Europe, near Switzerland, and he's been held in an asylum ever since, sedated. Yeah, an incredible, intelligent man. And what happened is, place in Europe got raided. Now, this man is an authority on a particular part of military history, a King's College scholar. He's got thousands of books, yet the police went into his house and within minutes they found allegedly pornographic literature in his library.
He had more books. He had more books than the library would have books.
Yeah. But an incredibly nice guy. Again, he involved around the Court of Protection. But when Oliver said to me he was entirely satisfied, i.e. that I'd been put onto the streets as a Royal Navy veteran, and I thought, what is the point of serving this country when people say that to you? And the Freemasons signed the military covenant. But for him to come out with that and be protected by Freemasonry, no. Like I say, my loyalty, like a lot of other Freemasons I know, many with police service, It's the family unit to protect these children, to protect these mothers, and obviously the vulnerable. But it's not happening in our courts. It's not happening in our courts. And anyone who dares to speak out, like me, they will attack you. But in this latest attack, which started in 2022, they've actually bought themselves all out. So we know who they are. We know who they are. And they don't like it. Anyway, back to you.
Yeah, I was going to say the only problem is with this sort of fight you're having is, will they come out again in the future and try and give you more trouble? That's the problem we have done.
Everything we've uncovered, right, it's been shared. I've had people come to my house. One of them had an equivalent rank as a chief constable. He'd come from the military. And it took him less than 1 minute when he looked at those Court of Protection certificates to say, Mr. Lawrence, they are not valid. They haven't got court seals. And whoever in the police, various police forces have leaked me this information. It's been brilliant. A lot of data has been leaked to me. But it was a case of putting it all together and solving this puzzle. And as Lord Hardy said, it comes back to him. Tens of thousands of people are being certified under the Mental Capacity Act, and in some cases, the regulations are being willfully disobeyed. But there is one possible way to solve this. I got an email from, I think it might have been, he was former head of the Chief Superintendents Association, and he'd put forward that any police officer dealing with vulnerable people, i.e. children and adults, should be specially licensed, like they are when they drive the high-speed pursuit cars, or they have the police dog. They should be specially.
And the same with the court protection should have a barcode. Yeah, everything should really be literally.
There's no audit trail. That's where they get away with it. That's how they get, and that's what that senior military he was then in another role. He served right head of military policing, and he said there's no serial number on this. There's no serial numbers. There's no audit trail. There's no water embossment on these certificates, but they don't have the court seals, so they're not valid. And he was incredible. I did check with the MOD to find out whether he was who he said he was, and the answer came back, yes, he was. And in this latest attack, I've had some very strange visitors. I think they're called grey men. When they came in the morning. They left at about 7:30 at night. They spent all day questioning me. At the end of the day, said we're also psychologically assessing you, and they were amazing. And a bit like I say, because of what was done to me, I had to go to MI5 because of the very serious terrorism allegations made. And they were very good, no problems. But it's these two police forces, Thames Valley and Avon and Somerset. And that's where it rests.
Wow.
But
we'll continue this conversation.
But you think of these mothers who are outside the UK and they can't come back to this country because they lose their children. They've lost their homes over here. It is sickening, Andy.
Yeah, just try to think of one name. The first time I got involved in all this, with Maggie Tuttle, well, before I got involved I didn't get involved with this girl, but she lost her kid, and we was talking, and I've forgotten the name, but she was from Boston in Lincolnshire. Like, I'm from Peterborough originally, and we met up, and we then started to do these conferences. Then we met Maggie, and I've forgotten her name, but yeah, she's in Italy, and she's been in Italy for the last 12, 13 years. It's ridiculous.
There's a case going on at the Isle of Wight at the moment My colleagues are fully aware of it. It involves a young girl, just over 2 now, been taken from the grandmother, and this grandmother is fighting to get this child back into her protection. And I'm watching, so are others, the emails that are being sent, and how this grandmother has been fobbed off by the court, the family division. She's being thrown all around the houses by all these people. Then you will see that the gagging orders come out on the mother, the grandmother, probably soon, and it will say, if you dare to talk, you will a civil restraint order with threats of imprisonment, with and the loss of all your assets, and the kids will probably be taken. Brian Gerrish has just dealt. You know Brian Gerrish. He's just made a case. Yeah, he's done a lot about this, and he's just done a podcast all about it. But why is it going on in 2025, Andy? It's been going on for years.
Now, they always say, don't they, and I'll quote from Maggie Tuttle, in the child's best interest? Or is it actually in somebody else's best interest that's going to make money?
Yeah, it is. Was it in my best interest to put me on the streets? Because when I finally got the correct diagnosis, thanks to the British Airline Pilots Association and Professor Gordon Turnbull, and who else was it? The Professor Abadonia, Duke's University in South Carolina, and more recently from Derriford, the Southwest Region for Neurology. I mean, I'd been put under a specialist brain injury organisation, and it could have cost as much as $800,000 for the treatment I've had by that under that supervision of that. That's a hell of a lot of money. And I had 24-hour access to psychologists, neuropsychologists, all specialising in brain injury. And under that umbrella, I was protected. And when that organisation withdrew all services from the southwest of England, it left me open. And that's when Thames Valley and Avon and Somerset Police and the worshipful brother Simon Oliver attacked me. And they did attack me viciously. Anyway, we will go back and we'll talk a lot more. But I'm sure you're going to get a lot of people contacting you. I've certainly been contacted. But yes, 120 of them are employees associated with Somerset NHS Foundation Trust. There's another thing, what a mental health nurse. I think it was Bruce Matthews from Somerset NHS Foundation Trust. He accused me of falsifying that brain injury identity card. It was issued by Headway. They are so difficult to get. You have to have a report from a consultant consultant neurologist. You have to be able to evidence. There he is. That's the creature. It's got. I was accused of falsifying that National Police Chief Council logo on that ID card by mental health nurses. Fortunately, Assistant Commissioner Martin Hewitt, who served with the Met, was the chair of the National Police Chief Council. He intervened and wrote to Avon and Somerset, Chief Constable Sarah Crew, and said it is an authentic card, because I've got a number on the back. And who else wrote more recently? Gavin Stevenson, who's now the Chief Constable of the National Police Chief Constable. There's been a meeting with the National Police Chief Council and Headway, the issue of that card, both of whom have written to Avon and Somerset Police Chief Constable Sarah Crew that the card is authentic. And there we are. That's what I got. But what was interesting, there we had from a police constable to a detective sergeant to a registered general nurse, all wanted to give psychological assessments on me whether I had capacity or whether, you know, I was fit to be questioned. And what experience do they have? Well, I asked this question at a conference recently to a consultant neuropsychologist, which is a very specialized sub-area, psychology, who can conduct a psychological assessment on a person in a police station, whether they're capable of being interviewed under police caution. And the consultant neuropsychologist, who does a lot of order protection work, said only a suitable qualified person, and a suitable qualified person would be either a neuropsychologist or a consultant neuropsychologist, not your local police constable and not your local detective as your detective inspector or a registered general nurse. And that's the card I'm accused of falsifying, but it's actually authentic.
Yeah.
I had that on me in Avon and Somerset Bridgewater Police Station. It afforded me no protection whatsoever. What they did, they put me into a custody cell. And it's important to know, in charge of police custody on that day was Chief Superintendent Claire Arms, Head of Operational Support, in charge of investigations and police custody. 2 days after this assault, she stood down and got moved to the College of Policeton later. Now, they had that card. They knew I was vulnerable, and they put me in a cell. Then they set 3 the mental health nurses on: Kylie Reynolds, Bruce McAvoy, and what was his name? McAvoy, Matthews, and Carly Reynolds. Those 3 mental health nurses. And I had an appropriate adult with me. The police cell was left open and guarded by surprise woman police constable Alana Snow, who'd overseen my arrest. And she watched them goad me, provoke me, antagonize me. Don't forget, they had a order of protection certificate with them. And they had that diagnosis, PTSD. And that's all in that order of protection. And I was wearing a Veterans United Against Suicide t-shirt. Oh, and they took great pleasure in winding me up, goading me, provoking me to start shouting or to become violent. Fortunately, I have a friend called Jimmy Johnson, Corporal Jimmy Johnson. He spent 40 years in prison. He writes a lot of articles on PTSD, and I'd followed the guidelines in Jimmy's book, Break Off. I stepped back, I didn't engage with them and didn't get pulled into this confrontation. But they enjoyed, and the police allowed this to go on. They could view what was going on the CCT custody videos at Bridgewater Police Custody Centre, and they must have enjoyed every minute, especially when the appropriate adult safeguarding me was taken away, leaving me on my own. And importantly, just to make sure that no one got caught,